My lecture today on William Butler Yeats's The Lake Isle of Innisfree will be a little different, and the assignment I've asked you to do will be based on this difference. So pay attention to what I instruct you to do here or what I model for you here, because that is what you'll be asked to do for the May 5th assignment. Your response paper is based on reading a poem in a similar way that I'm modeling for you. So the reason I do this is because a book that I have used in the past in my 102, my Introduction to Literature course, is by Kennedy and Joya, called the Literature and Introduction to Fiction, Poetry, Drama, and Writing. And they do a really nice job of kind of using this poem to discuss what poetry is in general. So I'm going to read what they have written. I think it's really nice couple pages, and by doing so, help you to understand the poem a little. And again, I'm asking you for the 4 poems you can choose for May 5th to do the same kind of activity. So Kennedy and Joya say, how do you set about reading a poem? Here are a few suggestions. To begin with, read the poem once straight through with no particular expectations. Read open-mindedly. Let yourself experience whatever you find without worrying just yet about the large, general, and important ideas the poem contains, if indeed it contains any. Don't dwell on the troublesome word or difficult passage, just push on. Some of the difficulties may seem smaller when you read the poem for a second time. At least they will have become parts of a whole for you. On the second reading, read for the exact sense of all the words. If there are words you don't understand, look them up in a dictionary. Dwell on any difficult parts as long as you need to. If you read the poem silently, sound its words in your mind. Better still, read the poem aloud or listen to someone else reading it. You may discover meanings you didn't perceive in it before. To decide how to speak a poem can be an excellent method of getting to understand it. Next, try to paraphrase the poem as a whole, or perhaps just the more difficult lines. In paraphrasing, we put into our own words what we understand the poem to say, restating ideas that seem essential, coming out and stating what the poem may only suggest. This may seem like a heartless thing to do to a poem, but good poems can stand it. In fact, to compare a poem to its paraphrase is a good way to see the distance between poetry and prose. In making a paraphrase, we generally work through a poem or a passage line by line. The statement that results may take as many words as the original, if not more. A paraphrase, then, is ampler than a summary, a brief condensation of gist, main idea, or story. Here is a poem worth considering line by line. The poet writes of an island in a lake in the west of Ireland, in a region where he spent many summers as a boy. And then the Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will rise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavements gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. Though relatively simple, this poem is far from simple-minded. We need to absorb it slowly and thoughtfully. At the start, for most of us, it raises problems. What are wattles? From which the from from which the speaker's dream cabin is to be made. We might guess, but in this case it will help to consult a dictionary. They are, quote, poles interwoven with sticks or branches formerly used in building as frameworks to support walls or roofs. Evidently, this getaway house will be built in an old-fashioned way. It won't be a prefabricated log cabin or an A-frame house, nothing modern or citified. The phrase "bee loud glade" certainly isn't commonplace language, but right away we can understand it, at least partially. It's a place loud with bees. What is a glade? Experience might tell us that it is an open space in woods, but if that word stops us, we can look it up. Although the linnet doesn't live in North America, it is a creature with wings, a songbird of the finch family, adds the dictionary. But even if we don't make a special trip to the dictionary to find linnet, we probably recognize that the word means bird, and so the line makes sense to us. A paraphrase of the whole poem might go something like this, in language easier to forget than that of the original. I'm going to get up now, go to Innisfree, build a cabin, plant beans, keep bees, and live peacefully by myself amid nature and beautiful light. I want to because I can't forget the sound of the lake water. While I'm in the city, a gray and dingy place, I seem to hear it deep inside me. These dull remarks, roughly faithful to what Yeats is saying, seem a long way from poetry. Nevertheless, they make certain things clear. For one, they spell out what the poet merely hints at in his choice of the word gray, that he finds the city dull and depressing. He stresses the word instead of saying gray pavements in the usual word order. He turns the phrase around and makes gray stand at the end of the line, where it rhymes with day, and so takes extra emphasis. The grayness of the city, therefore, seems important to the poem, and the paraphrase tries to make its meaning obvious. Whenever you paraphrase, you stick your neck out. You affirm what the poem gives you to understand, and making a paraphrase can help you see the central thought of the poem, its theme. The theme isn't the same as the subject, which is the main topic, whatever the poem is about. In Yeats' poem, the subject is the lake isle at Innisfree, or a wish to retreat to it, but the theme is, quote, I yearn for an ideal place where I will find perfect peace and happiness. Themes can be stated variously depending on what you believe matters most in the poem. Taking a different view of the poem, placing more weight on the speaker's wish to escape the city, you might instead state the poem, this city is getting me down. I want to get back to nature. But after taking a second look at that statement, you might want to sharpen it. After all, this Innisfree seems a special, particular place where the natural world means more to the poet than just any old trees and birds he might see in a park. Perhaps a stronger sentiment of theme, one closer to what matters most in the poem, might be, I want to quit the city for my heaven on earth. That, of course, is saying in an obvious way what Yeats says more subtly, more memorably. A paraphrase never tells all that a poem contains, nor will every reader agree that a particular paraphrase is accurate. We all make our own interpretations, and sometimes the total meaning of a poem evades even the poet who wrote it. Asked to explain a passage in one of his poems, Robert Browning replied that when he had written the poem, only God and he knew what it meant, but, quote, now only God knows. Still, to analyze a poem as if we could be certain of its meaning is, in general, more fruitful than to proceed as if no certainty could ever be had. A useful question might be, what can we understand from the poem's very words? All of us bring personal associations to the poems we read. The Lake Isle of Innisfree might give you a special pleasure if you have ever vacationed on a small island or on the shore of a lake. Such associations are inevitable, even to be welcomed, as long as they don't interfere with our reading of the words on the page. We need to distinguish irrelevant responses from those the poem calls for. The reader who can't stand the Lake Isle of Innisfree poem because she is afraid of bees isn't reading a poem by Yeats, but one of her own invention. Now and again, we meet a poem, perhaps startling and memorable, into which the method of paraphrase won't take us far. Some portion of any deep poem resists explanation, but certain poems resist it almost entirely. Many poems by religious mystics seem closer to dream than waking. So do nonsense poems, translations of primitive folk songs, and surreal poems. Such poetry may move us and give pleasure, although not perhaps a pleasure of intellectual understanding. We do it no harm by trying to paraphrase it, though we may fail. Whether logically clear or strangely opaque, good poems appeal to the intelligence and do not shrink from it. So far, we have taken for granted that poetry differs from prose. Yet all our strategies for reading poetry, plowing straight on through, then going back, isolating difficulties, trying to paraphrase, reading aloud, using a dictionary, are no different from those we might employ in unraveling a complicated piece of prose. Poetry, after all, is similar to prose in most respects. At the very least, it is written in the same language. Like prose, poetry shares knowledge with us. It tells us, for instance, of a beautiful island in Lake Guild, County Sligo, Ireland, and of how one man feels about it. This poem is a lyric poem. A rough definition of a lyric poem is, as it is written today, is a short poem expressing the thought and feelings of a single speaker. Often a poet will write lyric in the first person. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree. But not always. A lyric can also be in the first person plural, as in Paul Laurence Dunbar's We Wear the Mask. We'll read that in a week or so. Or a lyric might describe an object or recall an experience without the speaker's ever bringing himself or herself into it. For example, Gerard Manley Hopkins. Perhaps because, rightly or wrongly, some people still think of lyrics as lyre strummings, they expect a lyric to be an outburst of feeling, somewhat resembling a song, at least containing musical elements such as rhyme, rhythm, and sound effects. Such expectations are fulfilled in the Lake Isle of Innisfree, that impassioned lyric full of language rich in sound. Many contemporary poets, however, write short poems in which they voice opinions on or complicated feelings, poems that no reader would dream of trying to sing. Okay, so what I'm asking you to do for your next writing assignment is to sort of take through the steps that we just went through, which is to examine the words, read through, find difficult words, um, try to identify what you think the theme, the subject is, try to paraphrase the poem, and maybe note what the form it has. So that's the assignment. I want to end with just looking at who William Butler Yeats was really briefly. He was Irish, and his parents were Irish, and he went to schools in both Ireland and London. This poem in particular was published in 1893, but written probably much earlier. At the time that he wrote this, Ireland was struggling economically, and his family was too, and so they had to move to London, and they were missing Ireland very much. Poetry for Students says that The Lake Isle of Innisfree is one of Yeats' earlier poems and also one of his best known. It is perhaps so widely known due to its universal subject matter, that of the conflict between youth and aging and the longing for emotional escape. Certainly one of the themes here, we have nature is a topic, it's a subject, not a theme, but so is nostalgia, right? Looking back on something. I hope you can appreciate Yeats a little bit better after having looked over this poem, and I hope you have an idea of how I want the next assignment to go.